Hello, welcome to this Lit in 5 video on Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. This particular video focuses on the interaction between Willy Loman and Ben towards the end of Act 1. In my opinion, an extremely pivotal scene and really important in the discussion of tragedy, which is obviously the focus of Paper One if you're doing the AQA specification. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at 5 key areas here within this end of Act 1, the interaction between Willy and Ben, just to focus our analysis of it and to help you explore what Miller might be at in his depictions of Ben and Willy's interactions with his brother. So, the first one of these is Willy's perceptions of himself. And you should note, please, Willy's perceptions of himself are in marked contrast to how the audience is being encouraged to view him, okay? In terms of tragedy, then have a look at Miller's brilliant and very important essay, Tragedy and the Common Man. I will make a separate video about that. That is a key text for AO3 to help your understanding of tragic context or literary genre context, if you like. So really important to look at that and look at the distance between how Willy Loman views himself, a king, a prince, this kind of regal status of his flawed perceptions of himself in terms of his status as a salesman and his success, and how the audience are being encouraged to see him here. That obviously links into the key point about hamartia. One of many flaws in Willy Loman is his blindness, something which is inspired by the play King Lear. There'll be a separate video on King Lear parallels and how Miller treats that and adapts it, of course. It's not a completely neat copy in Death of a Salesman. The second idea I want to point us towards relating to tragedy is the idea of Willy Loman being lost or presented or represented as being lost, displaced and adrift. If you've read that Tragedy and the Common Man, then you'll understand the importance of identifying images and moments in the play where Miller shows Loman's place and identity in the world as being lacking or unavailable or not realised or achieved. The important idea from Tragedy and the Common Man, of course, is that Miller thinks that is one of the most fitting themes or issues for contemporary tragedy. The struggle for mankind to locate his or her place and identity in the world, the struggle to achieve that. And we certainly see that with Willy Loman when his successful brother appears inside Willy Loman's mind. No escaping number 3 in this brilliant play and this brilliant scene, and the importance of Ben. We need to explore the idea of American dream ideology. Now, in a play which is a tragedy and studied as a tragedy in the AQA syllabus, we have to be considering this as possibly the true antagonist of this play. Usually as an antagonist is a character, of course, Iago in Othello, if that's the Shakespeare play that you're doing, Edmund and King Lear. However, we need to consider this adaptation of the tragic form here, and a lovely thing that AQA would probably like you to point out if you're writing about Death of a Salesman. So, yes, Ben is a sort of character who embodies this, but he's only one embodiment of it. It's much more fitting, I think, to think of ideology, this American dream ideology, as being the major antagonist who, or that, I guess you have to say, because it's not a who, which brings about Willy Loman's peripeteia and ultimate and inevitable demise as a tragic hero. Remember, the idea is not to be surprised or, stunned or shocked at the fact that the tragic hero dies. Their death is a necessary scapegoat within the genre of tragedy. Moving on from that, it's very important and useful and beneficial for your AO2 to discuss Ben as a psychomachian embodiment of American dream ideology. not unproblematically, American Dream ideology tells you that you'll work hard and you will, 100% certainty, yield the rewards and realise the success within the land of opportunity. As we're going to see, Ben's success was extremely fortunate, a fluke, a pure accident. So very important to understand that Miller is using this as a critique of the sort of false promises of American Dream ideology. But psychomachia, or a psychomachian embodiment, will be good for your AO2. There's a quick definition there for you, a dramatic or literary sort of technique which depicts a conflict within the soul or between the soul and the body. I think that's a useful definition. We see very clearly the state of Willy Loman's body in the opening act. He's exhausted, as Linda will soon say as well in this moment, barely able to carry his 2 suitcases, and, just completely emptied of all energy. But Ben appears, and this is why Dustin Hoffman plays it brilliantly in the film. He regains that sort of youthful vigour and desire to pursue success once American Dream ideology sort of casts its spell over him again. You see it in other pieces of literature as well, such as Dr. Faustus, or if you're familiar with the amazing genre of Looney Tunes cartoons, or Tom and Jerry, you'll see it in the form of angels and devils appearing on shoulders. So there's psychomachia for you there. Last, but by most certainly not least, we're looking at Willy Loman's traditionalist, don't say traditional, say traditionalist values, especially of masculinity. This is my sort of reading of the play. You don't have to agree with it like any reading ever, of course, but I think Arthur Miller is depicting a sense of masculine values which he embodies and also tries to pass on to his sons, but when juxtaposed or contrasted with the character Bernard, the bookworm, the anemic, then we're going to see how these values are archaic, they are anachronistic, they're belonging to a previous age, and they're becoming outmoded, and they have no currency, a deliberately sort of chosen word hovering between money but also value in a non-monetary sense in a modern changing America. So these values arguably are another catalyst of peripeteia and largely a factor in why the boys, Happy and Biff, are also lost and displaced and adrift in this modern America. Okay, so 5 areas to concern ourselves with here as we go through some key quotations from the end of Act 1. Onwards. Okay, so I've sort of condensed those 5 areas at the top of each slide here just to keep them in sight and in focus as we go through some of this. Let's dive into this sort of middling towards end of Act 1, the Willy and Ben interaction that I want us to look at. So we have here a quote from Willy Loman, which is when poor Charlie is in the kitchen playing cards with him, and Willy Loman is starting to see/hear Ben in his mind. You may wish to recall the original or planned original title for Death of a Salesman was The Inside of His Head. I'm not sure if that's the inside of his mind or inside of his head. Have a quick Google and check that out. So the interiority of Willy Loman's mind is extremely important, of course. So here's Willy saying to Charlie, no, he had 7 sons. This next bit is what I want to focus on. There's just one opportunity I had with that man. And then you get your ellipsis, your ... Almost as if Willy is sort of daydreaming with a kind of rueful regret and nostalgia. Important to the word opportunity, of course, which links to the idea of American Dream ideology. But there was a juncture, there was a crossroads, an opportunity, a direction that Willy could and should have taken in his mind, and yet he didn't. And here he is now in the present. He'll never admit to being a failure. That's part of his hamartia of pride and hubris. But I think that word opportunity and that little ellipsis there, maybe that's as outspoken or as explicit as you're going to get from such a hubristic tragic hero in terms of regret that he didn't take that chance. That's also backed up here in this next line. Sure, if I'd gone with him to Alaska that time, everything would have been totally different. So you can look at your conditional tense there in his dialogue. If. So there is that idea of a rueful regret and rueing not taking that opportunity, which led to his brother being much more successful, depending, of course, if you view finance and money as success. Some key quotes from Linda later in the play, which urges the audience to reconsider and challenge whether that constitutes success or not. Next quote here. I find when I teach this play, a lot of students are extremely critical of Willy Loman, maybe unfairly so. But you're entitled to your own conclusions. Audiences and readers are, of course, they are. However, in most of the discussions, particularly in Tragic Heroes, you need to be able to make the case for a sympathetic reading or interpretation, one in which the tragic hero elicits pathos. If you have a tragic hero who is totally devoid of that or inspires no pathos, then arguably they're not a very compelling tragic hero. So do have that AO1/5 skill about you to be able to make the case of sympathy towards. But here we got here, look, so this is maybe starting towards that. Willy Loman, Ben was the only man I ever met who knew the answers. So we're going to talk about Ben as a surrogate father figure shortly, with a very key quote coming up later. But there was someone who could, or tried to, or had the possibility to, give Willy Loman, quote unquote, the answers. Sort of secret of business success, I guess. And as an example of business success, Willy Loman feels that Ben had the blueprint, the answers. A neat little parallel there if you want it, but be careful using this if it doesn't fit in with your essay question or your focus on tragedy or your debate. We've just seen a previous flashback earlier where Bernard had the answers on the test, the academic test, and Willy was insistent that Bernard give his boys, Happy and Biff, the answers. So little sort of ideology there of academic success being the answers worth working hard to get and to pursue, rather than some lucky scheme or a winning business idea. So, interesting little parallel there. More on Willy's desperation there, seeking or inviting pathos from the audience. Willy shaking Ben's hand. Ben, I've been waiting for you for so long. There's that guidance of being lost and adrift, part of tragedy. What's the answer? Repetition of the word answer again. How did you do it? Now, the answer to this is one of many ways in which Miller is very effective in shattering or exploding this American dream ideology, this spell, this illusion. And this is Ben's sort of, it's almost an axiom, a self-evident truth, okay? When really all it is pure luck. I had a very faulty view of geography, William. Proof that not doing well at your geography doesn't, or maybe it inspires your success. Sorry, geography students. I discovered after a few days that I was heading due south. So instead of Alaska, I ended up in Africa. And there's Linda. Okay, Willy's version of Linda. This is all inside his mind. And her incredulity. Africa, you ended up there. And then Ben, of course, discovers diamond mines. Extreme good fortune. And there's Linda's astonishment again. Now, if you look at this, you can see Willy endorsing Ben as this model or exemplar for success. So young Biff and Happy appear in the stage directions. Again, these are all characterizations in Willy Loman's interiority, his mind. Listen to this. This is your Uncle Ben, a great man. Now, you might think that's not a very significant line, but look at number one. Willy Loman's perceptions of himself. Willy will constantly tell anyone that he is a great man. and knocked him cold in Providence, destroyed him in Boston, etc., etc. I think this is probably said with the most sincerity, because Ben typifies success, monetary success, don't forget. And Willie's very keen to hand that down. Look, tell my boys, Ben. So this idea of guidance and answers will help tackle or resolve these tragedy concerns of Miller in terms of being lost and adrift, and to locate one's place and identity in the world, all through the wonderful enabling American dream ideology, not, which as Willy labels it, the greatest country in the world. So I've kind of combined all of your 5 things there, but that gives you more to say, more to go on, more comprehensive and detailed analysis. So Willy sees Ben's fluke as pure vindication, as pure justification that his methods, his ideologies, his style of parenting is the blueprint for success. The irony, the juxtaposition, of course, prior to this scene or these moments, we've seen 2 30-year-olds still in their parental household, in their bunk beds, still plotting and planning, and extremely adrift and lost. So Willy says to the boys, you see what I've been talking about? The greatest, one of many superlatives, which sort of defines the Loman male mindset. The greatest things can happen. So a pure convert to American dream ideology. Let's not forget the pure fluke that led to Ben's success. Okay, moving on. Key moment here when the topic of the flute happens between Willy and Ben. The opening stage direction highlights the importance of the flute. We discussed this in lessons as almost putting a Pied Piper spell in the belief of American dream ideology over Willy Loman. It is the way in which Willy's dead father apparently achieved success and profit and defined himself as a success. And look very closely at the ending stage direction of the play and the beginning. The flute music precedes the curtain coming up, if I'm not mistaken, and it also succeeds or follows after the curtain closes. So think of that in terms of that Pied Piper spell over people who believe or are converts to American dream ideology. Interesting line here from Ben, which of course is Willy Loman's version of Ben. With one gadget, he, father, made more in a week than a man like you could make in a lifetime. And then Willy typically responds in this kind of status proud sort of moment. Oh, that's just the way I'm bringing them up, Ben. Rugged, well-liked, all around. Now, don't underestimate the importance of this, please. Ben, as I keep saying, is a figment, a psychomachian projection of Willy's mind. It's very interesting in a psychological sense here, psychoanalytical sense, that this character made by Willy Loman, not all of the time, but certainly in this moment, appears to scold and reproach Willy. So, in essence, that's Willy Loman scolding himself. If you want to, you can get a bit Freudian on that in terms of the id, the ego, and the superego. Have a little Google of that if you're interested. But Ben is almost becoming this super ego presence. Freud talks about the super ego being father or father, a priest or God, capital F, and then your parental biological father. That's really scathing, that line. With one gadget, language of monetary amounts and quantities, I'll talk about that elsewhere, he made more in a week than a man like you could make in a lifetime. Extremely harsh upon himself, because that's coming from Willy's mind. So you can argue the significance of Ben, certainly in this moment, is to sort of shatter that hubristic pride and arrogance and self-deceit or blindness Miller has Willy Loman exhibit. But that's such a fascinating line on a sort of psychological level. Okay, a little bit more there in terms of Willy's traditionalist values, how he's bringing up his boys, rugged, well-liked, all around. Well, the ruggedness just has no currency. If it did, we'd see them successful or somewhere near the scale of Bernard, the older Bernard. But we don't. Happy and Biff are not that level of success. Well liked. Well, did Bill Oliver, not that we ever thought he would, suddenly produce $15,000 out of a suitcase because of the regard he holds the Lowman boys in? No. So that's why I'm saying these are anachronistic and outdated values, or Miller showing them to be outdated and anachronistic values. To reinforce that, I think we have this sort of pretend boxing match or sparring. Ben there's praising the boys in terms of their boxing ability. Good boy. But then, to totally shatter this idea of being rugged and all-round and masculine, the stage direction does this. Ben suddenly comes in, trips Biff and stands over him in a very hostile sort of manner. The point of his umbrella poised over Biff's eye. Again, maybe you can see that's some kind of King Lear reference to blindness and sight and true perception. And then Ben comes in with this. Never fight fair with a stranger, boy. You'll never get out of the jungle that way. So, well liked? Nonsense. This is the ruthless new America, which is dog-eat-dog and competitive and has no loyalty. Howard and Willy. And certainly the notion of being well liked is on the way out, becoming archaic and anachronistic. Instead, it's competitive and savage, hence the reference to jungle. Yes, in one sense that refers to Ben and his African sort of jaunt and fortune, but I think you can also see jungle as Miller reflecting on this new savage America. Look at the apartment buildings in the opening stage direction. Red, tall, angular, hostile, urban, and, like the flute music, they gain prominence at the closing stage direction after Willy has been put in the ground. Just a quick quote to end there to reinforce this kind of archaic masculinity which has no currency. We hunt snakes and rabbits. Biff can chop a tree down in no time. Great. Yes, very impressive. Unless he's going to be a lumberjack, which is one of many careers he hasn't tried and has made no go of. So that's again, it's redundant. It has no currency. There's no scale. We're going to rebuild the entire front stoop right now. Okay, good. Work in construction, earn a living. It's almost as if I hope you understand that the Lowman boys have a problem with actually committing and responsibility and hard work, I suspect, as well. More on Ben as this parental figure, this surrogate father figure, because Willy, much in the manner that a child wants to impress their parents. We've seen that with young Biff and young Happy. Look, Pa, I'm skipping rope. Look, Pa, I've lost weight. Look, Pa, I'm good on a punch bag. That sort of echoed there in Willy with Ben. Look, watch this, Ben. Here's how good my boys are. Give me praise, positive reinforcement, and Skinner, if you're familiar with this kind of stuff. But deeply tragic, as we'll see in a moment, worthy of pathos, I think, when Willy has this speech about the absence of his own father in Willy's formative years. Moving on. Okay, moving into this bit now, we see Linda, and this is the moment, or one of the moments, where Linda as a character becomes extremely prominent. She's spoken about as having an iron will of repression, but that repression fails here. I don't mean that in a critical way of her, but all of these thoughts and criticisms, necessary criticisms of her two boys, are unleashed here. Really powerful and sort of painful moments in the play, I guess. This quote here, or this section here, it's almost starting to sound like she's already delivering a eulogy, the words spoken in praise or in acknowledgement of the dead, and that doesn't happen, of course, till the end of Act 2. But key lines here, look, and it links into this idea of a tragic hero being a scapegoat figure, a necessary sacrifice, so the audience can experience catharsis. Tragic figures almost live out a cautionary tale so that the audience can learn from their mistakes. So these quotes starting to sound like the eulogy already. I don't say he's a great man chimes brilliantly with what Miller is saying in Tragedy and the Common Man. Willy Loman never made a lot of money. His name was never in the paper. He's not the finest character that ever lived. But he's a human being, and a terrible thing is happening to him, so attention must be paid. There's the idea coming through brilliantly of Willy Loman being a scapegoat, a tragic hero from whom the audience must learn the error of our ways before we suffer the same or similar fate to the scapegoat. That's the idea of a tragic hero, you see. He's not to be allowed to fall into his grave like an old dog. Attention must finally be paid to such a person. And chiming in with the sentiments from Tragedy and the Common Man, we also have this from Linda. A small man can be just as exhausted as a great man. So 2 references towards great man there. Absolutely links perfectly with Tragedy and the Common Man. Look at consider the pathos being sought here. Look, he works for a company 36 years this March. Opens up unheard of territories to their trademark, and now in his old age, they take his salary away. So we've got the idea of being disposable here. The great line, a man is not a piece of fruit. You should know that one. Very, very important quote. Important to look here, though, with this mention from Linda. Now, I think the audience trust Linda. In terms of her perceptions of things. Willy Loman's perceptions of himself, number 1, no. We have to be really, really sceptical of that and factor in blindness, hubris, pride, arrogance, all these kinds of things. But let's give Willy Loman some credit through this credibility of Linda. Linda says that Willy, as a younger man, as a younger salesman, opened up unheard of territories to their trademark. So there's some considerable success that Willy Loman once had for the firm he works for. He sold the line and established new buyers and a new consumer audience for whatever they sell. You never learn that, of course. So, okay, he's not Rockefeller, he's not Bill Gates, he's not Stephen Hawking, he's not Uncle Ben, but let's give him some credit there, that once or previously he has had some success. The key point coming from that, of course, how disposable, how cruel, how ruthless, how lacking in loyalty a new cruel business-minded America is, and the notion of being well-liked, absolutely shattered and exploded when Willy goes towards Howard asking for some leniency or some help at the beginning of Act 2. The awful sort of degradation and the lowering of status here for Willy Low Man, aptonymic surname, of course. For 5 weeks he's been on straight commission, like a beginner, an unknown. Okay, so very important in terms of status. Willy will challenge this, of course he will. Go to Filene's, go to Boston, we're going to look at that in a minute. Big shot. Big. Okay, he's anything but. But if we're looking also at tragedy in Pathos, place and identity has been lost or cannot be found or attained or sustained if he's an unknown or a beginner. So tragedy being evoked there, pathos being evoked. Just want to have a quick mention of this quote, or these couple of quotes. You can read it again, it's really powerful stuff from Linda. The idea I want to raise here is not so much in the 5 themes, but a King Lear parallel. For reasons that Lear himself brings about through blindness, hubris, arrogance and pomposity. Lear ends up talking about filial ingratitude. The ingratitude of ungrateful children who don't appreciate all you've done for them. And Linda's very much reinforcing that idea here. Some very scolding stuff, and merited, I think, towards these two sort of man-babies or man-child characters in Happy and Biff. So Biff gives it, "Those ungrateful bastards," and then Linda just replies straight away, "Are they any worse than his sons?" Ouch. But a fair question, in my opinion. Gratitude of offspring or children here, look. And you tell me he has no character. So lost and adrift, place and identity. The man who never worked a day but for your benefit. When does he get the medal for that? Is this his reward? To turn around at the age of 63 and find his sons, who he loved better than his life, one a philandering bum, and then Biff sort of reacts as shocked here. The other great quote from King Lear is, "How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have an ungrateful child." Now, there are problems with that statement in the play King Lear, but I'd argue there are fewer problems here. In Death of a Salesman, we do have ungrateful children who are not there supporting and helping and assisting their quote-unquote exhausted father. Linda's used that adjective twice now about Willy Loman, exhausted. So you can see that in this powerful speech here. Filial ingratitude again. He put his whole life into you and you've turned your backs on him. And there's that iron will of repression breaking down here, as this is all too much, understandably, for Linda, exposing these painful truths here. Biff's life is in your hands. These two boys are obviously have a complete aversion towards responsibility, either in terms of earning and to their parents. Okay, I've selected these quotations in the order, the sequence in which they appear in this section of Act 1. I was considering chopping it up and organising them by the themes or the issues that we're looking at in terms of 1 to 5. If I had have done that and we're looking at tragedy and place and identity, I'd have put this first because this is such a key quote in terms of inviting pathos for Willy Loman. Some people will, some people won't. As I mentioned before, proper discussion should consider the sort of pathos angle. And it's this quote here. Willy longingly in that stage direction. "Can't you stay a few days?" towards Ben. "You're just what I need, Ben, because I..." Come back to the stuff in the hyphens in a minute. "Well, when Dad left, I was such a baby, and I never had a chance to talk to him. And I still feel kind of temporary about myself." So be all over that in terms of number 2. Look, tragedy, lost and adrift, without or struggling to gain place and identity in the world. Now, the absence of a parent figure for guidance and direction, even the most cold-hearted people or audience, surely could have a pang of pathos towards that. You look to your parents as you get older for guidance, and you always have looked towards your parents for guidance before you're even aware what guidance is. There's Willy, I'd argue, at maybe his most vulnerable and honest and open about vulnerability. Maybe in the play, I'm happy to have a different quotation as the contender for that, but I never had a chance to talk to him. And I still feel kind of temporary about myself. Very powerful stuff. And like I say, I think Willy Loman is possibly his most vulnerable and honest there. Typical Willy Loman, though. Look at the stuff inserted in the hyphens. So vulnerability, Ben. I have a fine position here, but and then back to vulnerable. It's a face-saving thing, isn't it? And a status-saving thing. He doesn't have anything like a fine position here. Or maybe he does, but there's a speech from Linda which speaks to that in terms of, we have family and we have love of a sort, but that's for a different video. So powerful pathos being sought here, I would suggest. And again, more status. Look, turning to Ben. Business is bad, it's murderous, but not for me, of course. Completely untrue statement. Okay, significance of the stage direction there, hugely symbolic. Willy and Ben are at opposite ends of the stage. Well, there's the sort of success spectrum, if you like. So key bit of stagecraft there from Miller, very symbolic, very important. Another moment here where the psychomachia of Ben is important, I think. Willy sort of is moving on to self-validation now. Remember, Ben is only speaking the words that Willy sort of psychologically transmits into Ben, and then Ben pays Willy a compliment. William, you're being first rate with your boys. Audience about that. We know what the boys are up to in the present. They're nothing, they're no one, they're lost, they're adrift. Outstanding manly chaps. Well, we see Bernard, who was pilloried and criticised for not being manly. Arguably he is an outstanding chap in terms of success, if we're rating that in a monetary way. Their manliness is amounting to little more than dreams of playing at football and sports and stealing and taking things that don't belong to them. So the audience could and should have massive reservations about that self-validation that Willy Loman, through Ben, is giving to himself here. That's a deeply flawed conclusion. More of Willy there, sort of conjuring, if you like, Ben as a surrogate father figure. So full of certainty. That's good to hear. And then we get, sometimes I'm afraid I'm not teaching them the right kind of Ben. How should I teach them? So there's that surrogate father position that Ben occupies. Dad wasn't around to guide Willy, so he's looking to his older brother Ben to help him achieve that. Okay, we're coming out of the Ben sort of reverie now, and Willy and the audience are back in the present. Linda of now is talking to Willy in his old age, and we kind of see that there with half to Linda as he goes shaking it. What a man. There was a man worth talking to. And again, that deeply problematic self-validation. I was right. Oh dear. Okay, blindness, hamartia, etc., etc. Notice the lexical sort of connotations of worth. We're looking at monetary amounts again. Part of the problem with the Lomans and the American dream ideology. Speaking of which, Linda's scolding the children again. You never stayed in contact. I know, dear, I know. But he, Willy, likes to have a letter. Is the key line here in terms of American dream ideology. Just to know there's still a possibility for better things. Now, in a way, that's nothing to do with America, all right? Hopefully most people wake up with some kind of enthusiasm at some stage in the week or the month that today's a brand new day, a brand new opportunity. However, in this play, I think it borders on unhealthy levels. In the opening stage direction, the flute music speaks of the horizon. This is a critique of American ideology and the false, in Miller's view, ideology that every day, just around the corner, there's the chance to make $1 million and the chance to be a big shot or big and a success with $1 million idea, which, as we'll see shortly, you have to turn those insubstantial things of ideas, it's an abstract noun, into reality of cold hard cash. And the Lomans struggle with that and fail at that. Okay, Willy re-enters. He's been listening to a lot of this from around the corner. And then we get Biff kissing his clearly upset mum. All right, pal. It's all right. It's all settled now. Interesting, again, sort of the language of a business deal, perhaps. I've been remiss. Maybe a little bit of an epiphany there. But is it enough? That's different discussion. Now I'll stay and I swear to you I'll apply myself. It's just, you see, Mum, I don't fit. Look at that in terms of being lost and adrift. Now Biff clearly doesn't, and he has the epiphany that maybe the other characters don't have towards business. Still doesn't lead him towards any kind of tangible success, but at least Biff has that anagnoresis, that realisation or epiphany that arguably his father never fully arrives at. Okay, and I'll make good. Massively important moment here in terms of number one, Willy's perceptions of himself. They laugh at me, huh? Go to Filene's, go to the Hub, go to Slattery's, Boston. Call out the name Willy Loman and see what happens. Well, as we know at the end of the play, with the kind of really poor attendance and the lack of people around Willy's grave, he doesn't have the reputation he believes he has. And look at this, language of quantity and amounts again. Big shot. All right, Pop. Not fully content with the say thing there. One final shot at his son. Big. All right. And then we get more conflict here. So massive distance between Willy's perceptions of himself and how the audience will see him, which again is corroborated later on with that really poor turnout or lack of people attending to pay their respects to the tragic hero of the play. Okay, a few moments more of conflict here before there's this sort of really awkward and really unsettling upturn in the mood and the tone as optimism starts to enter. You might wonder why I'm being so cynical about optimism, but we know how the play pans out, and we know that this planned deal with Bill Oliver does not come to fruition. So we see here, then what are you even talking about? I should note here that there's should be a separate line when Biff, this is Biff speaking. It's not what you're talking about, Biff, it's what you're talking about. Biff getting angry. Well, all I said was I'm going to see him, that's all. I love the irony of this line here, Willy turning away. Ah, you're counting your chickens again. For then, about 2 beats later, to see all of the Lohman household counting their chickens about an idea and their unstinting belief and certainty in the fact that this proposal, and that's all it is, a request, a plea for money from Bill Oliver, is somehow nailed on certainty, is going to lead to the upturn of fortunes of the Lohman household. So counting chickens is absolutely an illness or a symptom or condition of this damaging American dream ideology and the spell it puts these Lohman men under. Speaking of certainty here and critiques of the American dream and the hubris and the arrogance and blindness of the Lohman men, look at how often the abstract noun idea is used in these moments here. I got an idea, a feasible idea. Feasible, really? Let's talk some sense. I thought of a great idea to sell sporting goods, and then in theory this sounds perfect for the Lohmans, doesn't it? They love their sports, they love their physical activity, rugged, all that kind of stuff earlier. This would be the ideal business for the Lohmans to make a success of. And then it's saturated in sort of exaggerated amounts of money and fortune. Look, it's $1 million worth of publicity. The Lohman brothers, so the idea the family is going to prove the blueprint for success here and togetherness. And then Willy, 2 minutes ago, berating his boys for counting chickens. That is a $1 million idea. Okay, now, an abstract noun. The word we've used in lessons here is intangible. As intangible or as not solid as a horizon. Okay, so look at that opening stage direction again, in line with that. Last few moments here, we see some of the distance and difference between Willy's perceptions of himself and how others see him, and this is from his own son, of course. Well, let's face it, Willy, he's no hotshot selling man, except that sometimes you have to admit he's a sweet personality. So one of Willy Lohman's views, his kind of blueprints for success, personality wins the day. No, it doesn't. According to this play, studying hard and hitting the books, academic sort of strength and hard work, that leads to success and winning the day in the form of Bernard. Okay, so here we have the boys playing dressy up, thinking that buying a brand new tie will be the thing that clinches the deal. It's just a further waste of money for a romantic, intangible notion. Just wanted to point out here something I'll speak about in another video, the sporting language. So there's Biff, full of optimism. G, sounding like a boy, which he is. Willy's just berated him for that. I'm going to go into Oliver tomorrow and knock him for I think that usually ends in the word loop. okay, which I think comes from maybe some kind of boxing knockout idiom, or maybe some baseball, smashing the baseball out of the park with your baseball bat. And of course he doesn't. So a sporting business being confirmed and believed in through sporting language, but we remember early on in the opening stage direction, for no coincidence, I think Miller places a silver trophy in that opening stage direction. Keep an eye on the contrast in a moment with the use of golden in the end of this act. An important contrast of colour symbolism there. Okay, the last few moments of Act 1, no coincidence, Miller has Willy's mind wander back in that nostalgic way. Remember, the word nostalgia comes from the Greek nostos, to return, so expressing a wish to be back in a previous time or period, towards the Ebbets Field game, the championship of the city. And then Linda sings this lullaby. And Willy reminiscing about the potential and the promise that Biff once had, but now, as we see in the present, has wasted or not made the most of. So we get, when that team came out, he was the tallest, remember? Defining things in superlatives again. Biff clearly isn't the tallest anymore. I don't just mean in sort of biological, sort of metric height reasons. He's one of many. He's absolutely a dime a dozen, with nothing of the Loman promise or specialness about him. Juxtaposition all over these scenes for sort of ironic contrast of the then and the now. Linda just happens to say, "Oh yes," and in gold. And then we see the golden pool of light. I refer you back to the silver trophy of earlier, usually symbolising second place. Yes, you can have trophies that are silver that signify the winner, but I don't want to get too pedantic about that. And then Willy's line of dialogue, like a young god, he was in the past. Hercules, he was in the past. Something like that. So 2 references to gold, the very flattering comparison to Hercules, and then the juxtaposition of Hercules having a cheeky cigarette, not very godlike at all. So there's Biffy comes down stage in a golden pool of light. So potential not realised, potential wasted, and definitely not earmarked for some kind of success because of the quote-unquote stock he comes from. Willy's word in the Ben scene earlier, as though greatness is somehow genetic in the genes. Possibly the opposite here, really. A star like that, magnificent, can never really fade away. The light on Willy is fading. Yes, I know that's referring to Biff, the light that will never fade away, but we know where this is going, don't we? Sort of forerunners, foreshadowing the failure that is about to ensue. Just look at the opportunities that were in front of the young Biff as well. The representatives of 3 colleges standing by, 3 potential leads or opportunities in front of the young Biff Loman. And the buyers I brought, and the cheer when he came out, well liked. Loman, Loman, Loman. God Almighty, he'll be great yet. Okay? Great, greatest, biggest, tallest, big shot, big, most. Really keep an eye on superlatives in the dialogue of these male characters in Death of a Salesman. They're totally unjustified. Okay, and then Linda turns attentions towards Willy, looking after himself. Will you ask Howard to let you work in New York? And that awful sense of foreboding. First thing in the morning, everything will be all right. And sure enough, when Act 2 starts, there's a huge sense of optimism. People have almost called it like an advertisement, to give it its proper American sort of name, of a picture-perfect family with the white picket fence and the husband going to work and the breadwinner and the coffee and all this kind of stuff. We've got an absolute sense of dread in this misplaced optimism, largely because of blindness and these flawed perceptions of themselves. Just ending here. We see a little reference to nature. Gee, look at the moon moving between the buildings. Maybe that's something that alleviates the sense of foreboding and tragedy. Remember how nature is blocked out? So this appearance of the moon between the buildings might suggest one last swan song, one last hurrah, one last chance at success for the Lomans, because nature is making an appearance within this sort of urban jungle and this ruthless, cruel new America. So sort of more sort of trickery really from Miller, with this idea that there may be one last chance with the reappearance of nature. But of course, we know where that ends up. Okay, hopefully you found this useful in what I think is a really important and pivotal scene in Miller's tragedy. If you found this useful, add some comments, add some likes, add some requests for other videos you may want and may be useful to you. Subscribe to the channel. Best of luck.